All right, cool. All right, we'll be starting in just a couple minutes. All right, thank you so much everyone for attending our talk. We hope you all are having a good day. Raise your hand if this is your first DEF CON. Wow, okay, that's awesome. Well, I'm telling you that it's Friday, so you got 2 more days of a lot more to come. So I will be, okay. All right, so just so that everybody can hear and see as well as possible, if you can, move as close to the front as possible. You know, you can leave, don't leave any seats, just come up just so that, you know, it'll be more crowd interactive. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you, thank you. So I'm going to, well, my name is Sydney, and I've been volunteering with Blacks in Cybersecurity for about a year now, and I'll be introducing my friend. Dr. Fatou is a passionate professor and cyber engineer whose diverse interests span from hacking and advocating for digital equity in marginalized communities. She has a background in cyber and a knack for creative problem solving, and she dedicates her career to bridging the digital divide, ensuring that undeserved populations have equal access to technology and opportunities in the digital age. She also has a LLC called Datacation with the mission to increase cyber education, particularly in underestimated communities. Today, we will be discussing a talk that dives deep into historical context of redlining, segregation, and the enduring legacy of unequal access to technology, particularly focusing on our Black community. And also, by shedding light on these issues, the presentation aims to foster awareness and discussion on strategies to bridge the digital divide and promote equitable access to technology in marginalized communities. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Fatou.
Take your time.
Alrighty. Hi, everyone. Can y'all all hear me okay? Okay. So thank you for the lovely introduction, Sydney. So my name is Dr. Fatou Sankare, and yeah, I'll get started. I'm a little nervous, so if I start talking fast, slow me down. I'm from New York, so I gotta throw that in there. So Sydney gave an introduction. I guess I can also just give you guys a little bit about myself. So I am also a professor as well as a cybersecurity engineer. One of my passions is really trying to get more people in cyber, particularly like targeting them as they're younger. For me, I didn't really get exposed to cybersecurity until like I was halfway done with my bachelor's degree. So my bachelor's degree is actually in political science and Arabic. I wanted to go to law school, and I think that pipeline needs to be studied. The political science law school track onto cybersecurity. So I kind of just know that like anything is possible, especially when it comes to this field, but also just exposing people from a really young age onto that. And again, I also grew up in New York, so one of my passions is focusing on like inner city kids in New York City. I grew up in the Bronx, specifically one of the poorest parts of New York City. So just having that passion and that drive for wanting more for myself, but also generations to come as well. All right, so we can't talk about the lack of like technology skills or cybersecurity without talking about like the actual issue, and this goes back to like way before most of us in this room were born, and that's redlining, right? So a lot of us are familiar with redlining, but redlining is a discriminatory practice that dates back to the 20th century, where banks and real estate agents and other institutions basically classify certain neighborhoods and said, you know, this neighborhood, they really not gonna make it. They're a little too poor. We don't trust giving them any loans, right? So those neighborhoods based on your zip code was basically outed, right? And they were considered high risk for loans and investments. And this practice clearly has like a long lasting impact, right? Because we talk about certain neighborhoods where you're just like, oh, I don't really wanna live there, right? Because either lack of resources, you can see the lack of grocery stores and things like that, but you'll see like more liquor stores than there are supermarkets in certain neighborhoods, right? And that dates back to redlining. So again, it originated during the 1930s under federal government policies, particularly for homeowners trying to get loans to build homes in certain areas. So this is a little bit of the timeline of redlining until today. So from the 1930s to 1950, again, it started under the Federal Housing Administration, which was created to ensure that mortgages was basically going to be paid back within a certain time. And if you do that, you're classifying it based on income and how much money certain people are able to make during a given time. And then from 1951 to 1968, they basically stopped doing those operations, but redlining was technically still legal. That's when they implemented the Fair Housing Act. And you can see a little bit of that happening today when they talk about like Section 8 vouchers and things like that, giving people an opportunity to live in neighborhoods that they wouldn't normally afford based on their income. And then from 1969 to present, although redlining isn't really a term that most people use, we know that it's still enforced in certain areas where gentrification now has become a thing, where you see certain neighborhoods being upgraded, right? If you walk past a neighborhood that had a lot of liquor stores and now all of a sudden there's a Whole Foods popping up, you might want to check with your landlord because that rent might be going up at some point, right? So I'm sorry? Once you see a Whole Foods, it's over, right? So historical impact on housing, again, the discriminatory practices start off with redlining, and again, it is like when people got denied mortgages because of where they lived, essentially. And then we know that the neighborhood stability, the consequences for that was that it decreased infrastructure. A lot of people didn't want to build in certain neighborhoods because they know that the people that they were targeting couldn't really afford to live in those neighborhoods. I know y'all probably like, what's the point of all of this? I have ADHD, but we're going to get back to it, I promise. So the impact on community development. If you're not investing in a certain community from the housing perspective, you're obviously not investing in them from an educational perspective as well, right? You all are familiar with zone schools? Yes. Right? You have to go to a school that's in your neighborhood, but if you are in a red line neighborhood, you are going to get less resources and less money and not know about robots until you get to high school because your school didn't afford a robotics club and things like that. So the lack of investment impacted obviously like health outcomes, but overall the quality of life, right? Where you got your education and where your life kind of overall ended up, right? So based on your zip code, there's probably a timeline for how long it was going to take before you ended up in some sort of trouble or how far your education was going to be or get. All right, so this was also connected to segregation. So it reinforced segregation because if you can't afford to live in a certain area, you obviously had to stay in a certain area. We're talking about schools, we're talking about healthcare, we're talking about access to even just, again, housing. So let's talk about understanding redlining. So this was a project that was made on GitHub, and it was made by an organization, and it basically focused on New York City, and I wanted to implement it into my presentation to just give them their flowers because they did do the research, but it's really interesting because it talks about how it was redlining done, it talks about the timeline. Sorry, I kind of wanted to go into here. All right, so we talk about New York City a lot, and a lot of people are like, oh, New York City is a very liberal place, but when you think about it, there are different boroughs in New York City, the Bronx, Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island. And within certain areas of these boroughs, there are a lot of places that people would prefer not to live based on the history of redlining. So for example, here you can basically see the different areas that are affected by redlining. So the grade A areas were marked green, and those were in-demand affluent neighborhoods with no black residents. And as you can see in Staten Island, there's more green, but if you come to areas like the Bronx, for example, or Queens, or even certain parts of Brooklyn, you wouldn't really see any green marks. But when you get into grade B, those were marked blue, and they were still considered good, but less desirable than grade A. So everybody kind of wanted to get into those grade A neighborhoods. And then you get into grade C, these were marked yellow, and these were the neighborhoods that were considered declining, but they were often bordered by black neighborhoods. So what that means is that like in the middle of the neighborhood, it was just like more, I guess, affluent people, and then surrounding it, it was more black people, so people didn't really want to live there at all. Then you get to grade D, which you can see more of, and like when you get to like areas of like Harlem, and then most parts of the Bronx, those were marked red because they were typically populated by black residents and were described as undesirable, and then these were ineligible for the Fair Housing Act. So then as you look at things today, rents have kept increasing in like the past decade. And if you look in Manhattan, you can see that the rent in 2010 was about maybe $2,700. And then as today, it goes, you know, more than that. New York City, especially in Manhattan, is kind of unlivable unless you like real rich or you own a condo or something from years back. But then you look at places like the Bronx, right, which is where I'm from. So you can see that in 2010 you can get something nice for like $1,500, and then it goes up and down, and then now the price is actually going up because again they're building in areas that people were not necessarily, it wasn't desirable. And now like when I go home, I'm literally surprised because I'm just like, they just got rid of that school to build like a house that people are not going to be able to afford, kind of thing. So it's real interesting that way. And then of course the real estate prices have increased even more. You never hear anybody saying I want to buy a house in New York City. Like nobody, there's no houses. Like I don't even think there's land, enough land to buy a house in New York City. And then, of course, for most New Yorkers, their income isn't enough to cover a mortgage. So instead, most New Yorkers are forced to rent, again, because of like that lack of housing and space and stuff like that. And then here you can see a lot of the new buildings that were constructed over the last decade, and most of these new houses, again, were built in areas like the Bronx and then overpopulating Manhattan as well as Brooklyn. But although they're creating more housing in New York, you can also see the amount of evictions that are happening because, again, as they're building more, they're not charging rent from an income-based perspective where the people who are originally from there can't afford it. So it leads to a lot of people being forced to move out of houses that they grew up in and houses that they can't afford because of unaffordable housing. So you get back. So I wanted to bring it back to like, let's talk about the economic opportunities, right? So we talk about people not being able to afford where they live, and then when they can afford where they live, they don't necessarily get the opportunities that they should have in those areas. So we talk about the wealth disparities, right? So there's going to be wealth gaps, obviously, right? What I can afford to do and what I can't afford to do, but also what I can afford to take care of my family with. Then economic mobility. So think about just after school programs or summer camps. Summer camps are so expensive. Did y'all know how expensive summer camps were? Yes. They're expensive. It's like tuition, like for a little kid for the summer. So a lot of people who grow up in New York City don't necessarily have, I guess, the mobility to actually go into having summer camps and things like that. So they're forced to stay home for a lot of the times. And that takes away when a child is not actively learning for 2 months and they go back to school versus a kid who was actively, learning over the summer and goes back to school. There's obviously going to be that gap, right? And then that's not even talking about resources. That's just like from a parental perspective. And then broadband deserts. Have you all ever heard of broadband deserts? Where you go into like certain areas of a community and then it's like your phone doesn't work as much or your Wi-Fi is just trash even though you're paying for the most expensive one. So 3 minutes max. Right, and it's just like after that everything just kind of slows down. So broadband deserts are also very well connected to redlining as well. So any neighborhood that's classified as a redlined neighborhood will also be classified as a broadband desert. So we talk about the gaps and inequities in technology, and then we have to think about history, right, and redlining. So broadband deserts, you talk about a lack of infrastructure, economic barriers, as well as geographic isolation. And then the effects of these include lack of resources, limited job opportunities, digital infrastructure inequities, as well as cultural and social isolation. So in terms of the lack of educational resources, redline neighborhoods historically have received less funding. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I don't know where it's at.
That's there does work, but we can also have this one.
Okay.
I was concerned about overlap between the microphones.
All right, can y'all hear me? I don't think it's on.
No, it's not. I didn't want that thing where if we...
Oh, yeah. Can y'all hear me? I'm about to start singing. All right. Oh my God, this is awkward. Okay. All right. So redline neighborhoods have historically received fewer investments in education as well as infrastructure. So like I said, when it comes down to from just like a capitalist point of view, they'd rather take down a school and build a building because they'll make more money off of that building rather than the school. So this results in schools with inadequate resources, outdated technology, and limited access to STEM. So you look around a classroom and you're taking a STEM or engineering course and you're just like, oh, there's not many people who look like me in this course. Yeah, because you got to look back at the history and how there wasn't enough resources in the schools to begin with to invest in those neighborhoods. So as a result, students in these areas may not receive necessary education to pursue tech-related careers. But then there's also like a digital infrastructure inequity, right? So redline communities often lack robust digital infrastructure, including broadband internet access, which we talked about. Limited access to high-speed internet inhibits residents to fully engage online in learning code and things like that. A lot of us don't really learn how to code or don't download our first Jupyter notebook or Python coding until we get to college. A lot of people don't also know where virtual machines are until they have that very first lab in their computer science class. So that can also be an issue as well. And then limited job opportunities. Of course, if I'm not learning about technology from a very young age, I'm not really going to know that there's this many tech jobs out there, right? A lot of us don't know about cloud engineering, pen testing, and things like that until we get to an environment where we're at a conference like this and people are talking about the different avenues that there are, not just in cyber, but in technology in general. A lot of us are kind of forced, like me, to be a lawyer. To be a lawyer originally, or wanting to be a doctor, because those are the careers where you think of. But let's go back to even thinking about how much money you have to invest to actually go to law school and be a lawyer, where when it comes to technology and cybersecurity, a lot of people don't necessarily have to get a degree, right? You can get certifications, you can self-teach, and it'll be much cheaper and much affordable for you to get into these fields. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about like the cultural and social isolation. So it kind of just stops us from wanting to go to networking events, going to conferences, right? Because you're like, oh, if I go, I'm not gonna really like interact with anybody. I don't really know much. There's people out there that's smarter than me, because this all stems from just not necessarily having the resource from when you were much younger. Oh wait, hold on, why are you playing before I play you? Okay, so. So I wanted to, wait, no. Okay, wait, I'm trying to find where I was.
Right now we have, you know.
Okay, I'll give a little background on this video. So this is actually, do y'all know who this woman is? Governor of New York City. Y'all didn't see this video go viral? Okay, so y'all gonna see what she said in the video, and I took offense to it, so I responded in the very same video. So I remixed the video, and I responded to her. This is the governor of New York, Kathy Hochul, and she said something that really broke my heart, and one of the reasons why I'm even passionate about this topic, she basically proved my point. And what she said to me was very disrespectful, because I mean, if I'm somebody who, you know, whatever she said in the video, you'll see the response, but now it's like looking at like, I'm an example of a person who wasn't supposed to make it, right? And I did. So I just kind of wanted to respond to her, and I wanted to share this video with y'all as well, because it basically matches up with everything that I'm talking about today.
Right now we have, you know, young black kids growing up in the Bronx who don't even know what the word computer is. They don't
This was
know,
like 2 months ago, by the way.
That's crazy.
Because I'm black and I grew up in the Bronx and I know what a computer is. As a matter of fact, I get paid to break into computers. You should have said is that the Bronx is affected by redlining. And we all know that redlining is a discriminatory practice that started back in the 20th century. This is when banks, real estate agents, and other institutions basically classified neighborhoods that were predominantly black and immigrant neighborhoods as high risk for investments. Oftentimes, people in these neighborhoods were not qualified for loans. And that practice obviously had a long-lasting effect to date. This practice led to a limited investment in certain neighborhoods, which led to poor infrastructure. Schools in redline communities also were underfunded and had lower quality resources. Obviously, this affected the quality of education. If we're talking about resources, then one of the major resources is obviously going to be technology. Instead of saying that black kids don't know what computers are, how about we talk about the history and how we got here in the first place? It's important to know that the real barrier here is not the lack of awareness, but it's definitely the lack of resources. But let me know if you want to tour the Bronx, I got you.
Thank you. Thank you. Y'all know I could get a little smart, but so I wanted to also talk about, like, of course we talked about the problems with like redlining, but I'm not gonna leave y'all hanging without any solutions, right? So today, like, as you all are aware of the issue, if you didn't know before, Broadband Desert is just thinking about the effects of redlining and how you can help your local schools, whether you went to schools in that district or not, how you can basically just come and maybe just give a talk, right? Ask the teacher, reach out to one of the counselors at the school and say, hey, I'm in this field, I really just wanna give a talk, I really just want to talk to the students and give them exposure to a certain field. Like that's the tasking that I'm giving you all today. Just talking to somebody in your neighborhood and be like, yo, do you know about cybersecurity? Like, remember 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago when IT infrastructure went down? Like, you want to be a part of that? Like, don't push a software update, right? So, addressing the historical impacts of redlining and transitioning to a more equitable approach, often referred to as weblining, right? So we talk about redlining, and now we can talk about weblining from a technology perspective, right? Because we're not talking about housing right now, we're talking about more so how we get access to technology. So one of the things that I will basically talk about is like policy and regulatory reforms. I talk about redline policies, like maybe governors and local government should focus on more programs to bring more STEM into schools. Also thinking about like the fair housing and employment practices that exist, but to strengthen and enforce their fair housing, allowing people to live in areas that they may not be able to afford, so more affordable programming as well, but also just bringing those resources to schools, not just based on where you live, but everybody should have access to equal education. And then for me, data transparency and accountability, a lot of the times people are getting their data collected as well. So when we talk about the lack of education, it's not just from a cyber perspective, but nowadays we're forced to enroll in a lot of things. For example, when I was at TSA in DC, I don't know if the TSA agent wanted to fight me, but we could have got it. But I needed to get on my flight to get here, right? So she asked for my ID and I gave it to her, and then she asked me to stand in front of the thing. I said, I'm gonna pass. And she didn't want to hear that. She's like, what do you mean? I said, I don't want that. I said, you can use, your God-given gifts with your eyes and look at me, and then you can tell it's the same person on the ID. But they don't tell you that you can opt out, and I think that's what hit her off guard. It's like 4:30 in the morning, sister. We're not doing that right now, right? So it's one of those things where it's like a lot of people don't actually, like, even if you're not interested in cybersecurity, being more educated in technology in general, we all have smartphones. Like, even our parents, our grandparents, everybody's utilizing some sort of smartphone these days, right? So just letting them know, like, hey, you can't just opt into everything and anything because people are telling you to do so. And I was having a conversation with one of my friends the other day. I'm like, you can't even park your car without downloading an app to park the car. I would just walk away and not pay, get a ticket, right? So it's just like, that's all of that is data collection, because now you got a third party who know where you park, what time you park, your credit card information, your license plate. Like, it's just so much going on. So a lot of that is just education, right? Just not just in schools, but also like senior citizen housing, right? Going to local community centers and just like trying to get like the elderly as well on board with everything that's going on with technology. And then that puts me right into community engagement and empowerment, right? Talking to your community about the things that's going on. So not necessarily, hey, you should pursue a career in this because it is a good money maker, but you should also just know about this just for your sake, because whether you're deciding to go to medical school or be a lawyer, technology is being embedded in everything, and essentially you are going to be responsible for all of that. And then lastly, just industry collaborations and standards. We should all be on the same page from an industry perspective, like just understanding like why are you utilizing somebody's data, and how does that affect you, especially when your face is being put into a system that you know nothing about, right? Now you are part of like a virtual lineup with, you were in Vegas, but something happened back in like DC or Maryland, wherever you're from, and somebody's like, oh yeah, it's you against a computer. You were there, and it's like, no, I was in Vegas, I don't know what you're talking about, but you're going against a computer that recognizes your face as somebody else, and we all have somebody we look like, whether we like it or not.
Like brother, cousin,
Somebody, right? So yeah, there's a lot of factors that create barriers that limit us from our exposure to technology, specifically in the cybersecurity field. This is a QR code to get in contact with me, and I would love to stay connected with everybody. So thank you. Yes, you got a question?
So if you don't mind taking a little bit of time for Q&A.
Yeah.
One of the parts you just spoke about was really impactful for me because I didn't realize how many people, and I take for granted how many people don't understand, like for example at the airport, they can opt out. I did the same thing on my trip here as well and got a similar response or reaction from TSA.
Yeah.
Can you speak to your understanding, your perspective, the significance behind needing to do that?
Yeah. So for me personally, and I can't say like what it is for like, the masses, but I would say for me personally, I just don't feel like it's necessary for you to have my face anywhere, right? If I didn't give you the permission to do so. And my whole thing is, there is a note when they tell you that they're gonna scan your face that they're going to delete it, but you didn't tell me how long it's gonna be in your system before you delete it. You didn't tell me who you're sharing it with before you delete it. You also didn't tell me why is it necessary for a computer to tell me that it's me when you're standing right in front of me and you can do the same exact thing. So for me, I don't think that it's necessarily like a convenience purpose. I think it's a surveillance purpose, and that's why I opt out of it, because you have a TSA agent right there. Now, if I just walked up to a computer and they were the ones doing it and there was no human there, then that's a little different.
That's the goal, right? Is to normalize the concept to you before you just accept it as a...
Exactly. Yeah.
So even that point, right, when you mentioned surveillance, you actually also spoke about that a little while ago. When you mentioned that some people may be drawn to cybersecurity because of the financial return, but also just educating themselves, I don't think that a lot of people in the room really understand the impact of being surveilled. From your perspective, especially coming from New York, can you speak to some of the experiences where being surveilled has really been disadvantageous or been a roadblock for you or some of the people that you know?
Yeah, I can actually speak on this because it was a part of my dissertation research. So in 2020, you guys are familiar with the Black Lives Matter protests. One of the biggest protests did take place in New York City. So the NYPD and Instagram, your favorite app, has collaborated. So they are actually able to share that data with NYPD. So in New York City, have you all been to New York City, right? There's a lot of subways and stuff. There's also a lot of street cameras, which makes sense because it gives you a sense of safety. When you see the cameras, you're just like, all right, somebody run up on me, they're gonna get them. But those street cameras are actually there to actually be able to be used as facial recognition technology. So what was happening was during the Black Lives Matter protests, people were either walking or also protesting, and their faces were being picked up by these facial recognition technologies. So when there were situations that had happened, and NYPD wanted to figure out who was in the who was a part of it, the facial recognition technology was actually recognizing the wrong people. So the NYPD was able to raid houses based on warrants because a computer said it was this person. So that was one of the reasons why it's like a huge issue, because I could be walking to the store to get some bread, but I happen to be walking right into a protest, and now I'm a part of a virtual lineup again that I didn't know about, and I won't know about it until the cops come banging on my door. So that was a whole entire lawsuit with one of the individuals as well, and you guys can look that up. Yeah. Sorry, did I answer all your questions?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Recently in Nassau County, also New York, they just passed a law that you can't wear
a face mask.
Yeah,
face I saw that.
Not the suburbs, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In the suburbs of New York.
Yeah. Face mask. Mm-hmm. And even if it's because there's the ski mask and then there's the face mask. They're we don't care. You show your face kind of thing. So. And I think that's also, sorry, not to cut you off, but I think that's also interesting, right? And I wonder how many lawsuits will come out of that, because Nassau County does have like a huge Muslim population, and some of them do wear niqabs. So I wonder how that will look in the future if people are like, I wear this for a religious purpose, but now you're telling me I can't wear it.
But that's the thing, they said they have to make exceptions for medical and religious purposes.
Yeah.
But again, it's like people don't know
Right.
to say that, so if somebody stops you, like, why, why are
Yeah.
you wearing a mask, why are you wearing a hijab, whatever.
Yeah.
But a lot of people won't know to say, like, well, it's my right to, because all of this laws here, there's these exceptions.
Yeah, they like say it in like fine print and nobody reads it, so.
Yeah, the goal is to normalize, like, as an Indian American, I've experienced this like 9/12/01. My father was a politician in California, and we got visited by 3-letter agencies multiple times. And when my father requested a FOIA for what information these agencies had on him, they had my second grade grades included in there. So from like the age of 6, I understood I was being surveyed. And NYPD recently, there was a release of ancestries of interest.
Yeah.
And pretty much anyone of particular ethnic backgrounds or targeted higher risk. And I'm on that list too.
Oh, wow.
I definitely get it. But the goal is to normalize that concept of eroding people's concept of privacy, and because they put it at odds with safety, but does everyone here feel safer?
Yeah.
Apples and boundaries.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Detroit, we got something called Redlining, which is very similar to what you were talking about with regard to facial recognition. It's actually powered by Microsoft. So if you're a Microsoft customer, reach out to your rep, ask them more about the Redlining program. One of the things that we found is, Detroit being a majority black city, I think it's like north of 80% black. There's a lot of misidentification amongst the black race. So one of the concerns with these types of technologies is that there's little oversight and little understanding among the people that actually make the policy.
Yeah.
And sorry if I missed things, I came from late, I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
What do you think about an approach where, as citizens, we kind of band together and have our own kind of community-based approach to solving this problem, right? So, of course, so I live in San Diego now.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I tried to do when I got there was join the board of the city for privacy acts.
Yeah.
Right? They have a board just around privacy because they're a smart city as well. And it was hard for me to be able to compete with the law students or the last person that was the secretary for a really important lawyer, because they understand documentation and process and procurement, but they don't understand the technology. Maybe we're not best suited as extremely technical people in government, naturally, but outside of government, we should be still as effective. So what do you feel about maybe outside of government, how we could maybe approach this problem and solve for it, even up to civil disobedience, right? Like just wearing our job, or just wearing our masks?
That's an amazing question. And I think that there's so many different parts to it. But I think I'm gonna start off with this. We are the people who drive change for the government to actually make it. So before they can make a decision, they do a lot of stuff that we don't really care about. But before they get to that part, they hear the voice of the people, and we have to be as powerful together. So it starts off by educating each other, right? Telling people like, yo, when you go to like I said, just put y'all on. Y'all go to the airport and they try to tell you put your face up. Nah, not right now. Look at me. Am I the same person? Kind of thing. Like you have to do something like that, because if not, then we're all going to continue to. And it's just like my whole thing is, where does the picture go? Because I look crazy at 4:30 in the morning. Y'all gonna compare it to my Instagram because it don't look the same, So it's like it's one of those things. But I think that starting off with that, joining community organizations as well, and if there is not one, start one. Your local library, the library has so many resources, and they are open to programs. They want people to come in with ideas so that they can have people to come to the library. That's how they get their funding, right? And I think like another aspect of it as well is kind of just like understanding that if you don't really care about facial recognition and technology and all of that, and you're just like, I don't really care if they have my face, that's cool. But the people behind building the algorithms don't look like us. So our faces are not being put into the databases for comparison until it's time to go to jail. And you're just like, wait, no, get the data scientists that built that, find them, because that's not me. But you cannot let it get to that point without advocating for yourself now. And the only way, like, we don't have no federal comprehensive data policies. Like, your data is basically in the hands of the state that you live in. Illinois, California, I think New York, but no, New York is not on that list. But there's a couple of states, I think it's about 9 states that actually have like a data policy where it's like real strict. Like I think Texas, you couldn't use TikTok in Texas for a little bit because they have data policies. Where like in Vegas, I think we just chilling. Like we might be under surveillance right now. Like. Yeah, for sure. I hope that answered your question, Xavier.
Yeah, well, okay, I got one more part.
Okay.
One more part. Do you think that we should have like a digital Black Panthers? I'll leave it at that.
I plead the fifth. This is a recorded talk. I'm gonna have them after me. He's just kidding, y'all. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to reinforce that point that you were saying is, that's the term data set bias, and one of the ways that that became popular was iPhones. People literally just by word of mouth were telling each other. All iPhone Face ID recognition was just Silicon Valley, like bright-eyed white guy as the data set. So people with beards, minorities, anyone of any complexion with melanin in them was just not considered. And it wasn't until the impact on Apple's like public image, telling minorities like you can't use Face ID, they don't make it for minorities, when they started incorporating data set bias to their Face ID. So it is really a community of like, in some sense, holding a company publicly accountable for their behaviors.
For sure. So again, power of the people, right? Our voices are heard. We just have to make sure everybody's on board and not people going against each other when they're trying to make a point. I agree. Any other questions?
I just have a question. We were talking about suggestions for local and state governments. Do you have any suggestions for federal government of anything that they could implement or revise or redact or take off the books that would be beneficial?
I don't know if I could really say this, but they kind of benefit from us not having no policies, to be honest. So it's like if they enforce it, it's going to be harder for them to do their job. So it's really like we have to start off from a local level, right? And then from there, once everybody understands the impact that this has on us, then it's easier to put that pressure on the federal government. But right now, I don't think a lot of people even realize like the ramifications that this can have. Yeah.
I wanted to say, I wanted to ask, because you come from a background in political science where somebody who knows how to talk to people.
I do, for real?
Yeah. That's what's given.
Thank you.
I think the big problem with people in tech is that we don't know how to talk to people. We don't know how to say things. And you really are only as smart as you are if you're able to talk to a viral and understand. And so, because I was hearing that people in tech are not the best. Sometimes not the best people be in politics and stuff like that. So coming from a background in political science and coming from a background in which you have talked to people and talked to people, what would you recommend for a lot of people around here when talking to community members, talking to immigrants? I'm from New Jersey, we Arab, African, a lot of people.
Hey neighbor.
Right. And so, what would you recommend for talking to people who have no knowledge of those things or come from backgrounds where tech is not readily available?
I think one of the biggest things that like when we get too technical, right? Like when we advance in our careers and our educational pursuit of technology, we forget that we start using acronyms and people are like, what the hell did she just say? But then when you tell somebody you study in cybersecurity or computer science, you automatically become like 100 times smarter. Like they just in their heads, they're like, oh my gosh, she's a wizard. So when you are talking, they're not going to ask you any questions because it might be a pride or ego thing where it's like, I'm not about to stop you and interrupt you and ask you like, what is the CIA, like the triad, like, or the agency? Like, I don't know which one you're talking about, right? But we just start talking and they're just like, I don't know what you're talking about. But I think one of the things is like not, and I don't want to use the term dumbing it down, but just like understanding that they didn't take the classes that you took, right? So like imagine like your first day at a computer science course, like make it like an intro cybersecurity course or a computer science course where you can talk to people and you're the expert. I always tell people, yo, you could be lying in cyber. People don't know. Just keep talking. They're gonna be like, oh yeah, for real? Yeah, okay. So people don't know, but don't go around telling people false information that sounds smart. Just like take your time with it and then act like stop. Like I usually stop and I'll be like, do you understand like how I said it? Or like, should I reiterate that in a different way? Without obviously dumbing down like, you know, your knowledge and your background, but just making sure that you're on the same page with somebody. So when they walk away, they like, what the hell was that? Instead of like, yo, I understood what she was talking about, I understood what he was talking about, kind of thing. So yeah. And me talking, I'm really nervous. I got anxiety rings on. So, but it's like one of those things where you just come up there and you just do it. So,
Doing great.
thank you. I'm gonna cry later, but it's okay. All right, I think that's it. All right, thank you.
We do have one announcement. So our next talk is at 1 o'clock, and we have a capture the flag that starts at 12.
Here,
So
they can't hear you, girl.
Capture the flag that starts at 12, and then we have our next talk at 1 p.m. if you all have time. And yeah, have an awesome day, and thank you so much because this was an awesome talk. I feel like we learned so much.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.